One of the most important parts of any piece of media is how it starts. When writing essays, we are told in school to start with an attention-grabbing hook. Oftentimes, the very beginnings of books or movies are the parts that we remember most. In today's limited attention economy, the first few moments of something can make all the difference. We as YouTubers especially know this, because your view doesn't count unless you stay for at least 30 seconds of the video, which should be coming up right about now. Great, I got your view. Please don't leave though. And all this applies to albums as well. The best albums start off strong, and today we're going to go through some album openers that I consider to be really good. Not in the sense of just being good songs, but in particular, these songs are successful as openers to their respective albums. Because here's the thing, a bad track one can single-handedly weaken an entire album, whereas a song in the middle that's bad or doesn't seem to quite fit, it's just like, okay, whatever, we can skip it and move on. But you have to start on the right foot, you know? Making track one arguably the most important track in the whole album. And outside of just being a good song that grabs your attention, I think a good, successful album opener must also set up both the theme and the tone of the rest of the album. When it comes to themes, every album has some embedded theme and motif throughout it, just as with any movie or book or other form of storytelling. And just as the critical motifs are set up in the first scene of a movie or the first chapter of a book, I think a good, successful track one will also set up the main critical themes and motifs. When it comes to tone, this is pretty broad, but I think it just has to do with the overall vibes. It should give you a decent sense of the general vibe you're entering. That has to do with genre, that has to do with the sounds and instrumentation, that has to do with the vocal texture we can expect, that has to do with the emotional element. Is this going to be a very vulnerable personal album? Is it just kind of a vibes album? You know, all those kinds of things are important to set up in track one. On that note, I want to mention 3 key tropes I noticed when going through a lot of these songs. And by that, I mean common tactics that artists employ, especially in pop music, to make their track one a really strong attention grabber to hook you into the album. The first trope is that the opener is the album title. This is pretty common and straightforward. It just kind of establishes like, hey, this is the summary of the entire album. This is the representation of everything you're about to hear. You know, it's not just the first song, it's the title of the whole thing. So it really does a good job of getting you excited and interested in what you're about to hear. Second, the opener is not a full-length song. It doesn't follow typical verse-chorus pop form, but it's rather more like an interlude. This, I think, works especially well when the opening track represents a transition of some kind. So it's kind of like, hey, this is what you can expect for everything else, but we haven't really gotten into the meat of the album quite yet. And what that does is it kind of also shifts focus to track 2 as the actual full-length opening song of the album and maybe even the beginning of the story. And I think it's useful when the artist wants to get that kind of stuff out of the way a little faster. You know, it should still set up the theme, it should still set up the tone. But if the artist wants to do that quickly before getting into the meat of the album, this is a really common tactic. Third and lastly, the opener links to the final track. This one is not as common, but it allows the album to loop, in a sense, and gives you a cohesive sense of story from start to finish, which once again just strengthens that opener, and it's a pretty common trend, I think, in more story-based albums. Again, does an album have to do one of these things to be good? No, of course not. It just helps. But what's unique about these tropes is that when you notice them, you can kind of tell that that track is designed to be an opener. It was written and created with the knowledge that it would open the album, and so it wouldn't really fit anywhere else. And in my opinion, that even strengthens it because you know there was intention behind where it was placed. You know the artist thought it through. And so that's why these are tropes. That's why a lot of pop albums do utilize these or other ways to make it feel more like an intro. And so I think a good place to start would be an album opener that not only is really good at being an album opener, but it actually happens to fit into all 3 tropes at the same time. And that is...
No, I can't even look at you.
Emails I Can't Send is the opening track and title track of Sabrina Carpenter's 2022 album, Emails I Can't Send. And just wow, what a way to start an album. Let's go back to, again, the criteria for a good album opener, and we'll see how the tropes help make those happen. First, how does the song set up the theme of the album? Well, being the title of the album itself, it's kind of a representation for everything this album stands for. What's interesting is that the title is never even spoken in the song itself. Just like with the album, it stands as a representation and a metaphor for what this song and this whole album is about. And in this song specifically, it's a metaphor for how her dad abandoning her family or cheating has left her with this hole, feeling like all relationships she's in are bound to fail, feeling like all men she's with are deceiving her or manipulating her in some way, but also still loving her dad. And it's this very confusing mix of feelings that she doesn't feel like she can ever really say to him. And so it becomes this sort of ramble, this draft that she keeps for herself. These are emails that she can't send. And it influences how we see the rest of the album. Next, how does this song set up the tone? The main thing I get from this title track is that this album is going to be vulnerable. It's incredibly personal, heartfelt. It's a piano ballad through and through. So by doing this as the first song, she sets up like, hey, this is some serious shit. Contrast that with Taste, which is the opener of Short and Sweet. That is sarcastic, funny. So that sets up that Short and Sweet as a sillier album. It's more funny and humorous and satirizing her own situation, which is largely what it does. And that ties into the second trope. By being a short interlude-like track and being a ramble rather than a full-length song, it's also transitional in nature, representing how, Singular Act and Skin, those songs, that era, that drama that she went through, she's putting that behind her and she's ready to get more serious and personal. And simultaneously, it shifts focus to Vicious as the first full-length song of the album, which is still personal, but it's more upbeat. And so we see both the ballady sound and the upbeat pop sound at the start of the album, which she kind of goes back and forth between throughout the rest of the album. And lastly, it's just a really good hook. It's powerful, it builds, it's emotional, but it never drags because, she keeps it short and sweet, for lack of better words. And by doing all the things I've talked about, it really gets you ready and settles you in. You want to hear where the story goes and what else she has to say. And that is what an album opener is meant to do. Lastly, we have the final trope, which I think is just the cherry on top of everything else. This song connects to the final track, Decode, where at the end she says, I want to make a video to our future selves. And then she starts this song off with, it's times like these I wish I had a time machine, which again ties into this whole theme of regret and wishing she could change the past. You have to get to the end of the album and loop back before you realize it, but once you do, it just kind of strengthens the story altogether. So yeah, kind of like the quintessential album opener, if I do say so myself. Kind of on the flip side of that now, Runaway With Me by Carly Rae Jepsen, which opens her 2015 album Emotion, one of the best pop albums of the 2010s, is another really perfect album opener, but it doesn't fit any of the tropes that I've been talking about. It's just a standalone song, and in theory, it could be placed anywhere in the album and still make sense. Its special place as the opener holds more significance and just adds so much to the album because it still does what it needs to do to set up everything you're about to hear. First, on the themes, this album is all about crushes and fleeting romance, and this song is the perfect setup for that, depicting Carly wanting to take a lover away and experience the euphoria of romance and love, even if it's just for one night, even if it's just temporary. There's a sense of desperation and grief in the song, knowing it won't work, but begging for this person to run with her, a theme that keeps coming back throughout this whole album. And that subtle grief is also set up beautifully in the production and sound of the song, which gets into the next point on tone. I think this song in particular, out of any on the album, really perfectly balances the upbeat electric synth pop instrumentation with the somber, reflective, desperate tone of the production and lyrics. And that balance is kind of what pushes this whole album. When you're dancing, but you're also kind of sad at the same time, you're happy, but you're longing. It just works. It works so well. And beyond all that, it's an incredible song. Arguably one of Carly Rae Jepsen's best songs, possibly her best song ever. I mean, it definitely deserved to be a much bigger hit than it was, but we'll save that for another video. Mike the Snare, who's a YouTuber, talks about music, has a really good video on how perfect of a pop song this is, and I think you should check that out because from a more musical theory standpoint, I think it explains really well why this song does such a good job balancing those emotions. And it just goes to show that you don't have to design a song with it being the opener in mind for it to still be a really powerful opener. Now, I don't want to hear any nonsense in the comments about Cowboy Carter, alright? Not too much now. Cowboy Carter is truly an album for the books. The girls who get it, get it. I am not complaining at all about her winning AOTY for this. I think it was very well deserved. Also, I did go see her at SoFi recently, at least recent to when I'm recording this, who knows when I'm actually going to post it, but it was absolutely the time of my life, and I thought to myself, both for the tour and just the album, there really wasn't a better choice for track 1 than American Requiem. This is such a good opener because it sets up everything you need to know for the rest of the album lyrically and sonically, with all the context that has built up to this era really neatly laid out in a single song. Let's talk themes first. As you may or may not know, Cowboy Carter was essentially born out of Beyoncé's 2016 performance of Daddy Lessons at the Country Music Awards. That song was her most country song at the time, from Lemonade, and as someone known to sing more pop and hip-hop, and also not someone who fits the image of a typical country artist with huge quotation marks around typical, she was shunned by the community for this performance. And so she began developing Cowboy Carter, an ode to country music and the black artists who helped create it. In this way, she fuses country, hip-hop, and pop all at the same time, creating not just a country album, but a Beyoncé album, as she herself proclaimed. And all that backstory that I just gave you is literally what American Requiem tells us. She quite literally spells this out from start to finish on this single song. The beginning of the song and the titular lyric sets up ideas about the American dream and really the American facade, how what America proclaims to be and love are all farce and covers for issues that have just bagged American history. In the context of the album, I think she's kind of saying from the start that although country music has long been considered an American genre and core to American culture, many fans of country ignore its roots and the truth behind it, which she wants to bring to light if we're really going to consider this such a cornerstone of America. The rest of the song then delves pretty explicitly into her experience being shunned at the CMAs, along with Beyoncé's own family roots in the American South and in country music. She literally sings, "They used to say I spoke too country, then the rejection came, said I wasn't country enough. But if that ain't country, tell me what is." Again, pointing out the irony of American beliefs around country music. This is Beyoncé telling us, I'm going to give you country in a way you haven't never seen before. And that, frankly, is kind of the theme of this whole album. It's a revitalization of what country music really means, what American music can mean, and making sure that everyone who contributed to that, especially black artists, are included. Meanwhile, Beyoncé is also setting up the tone of the album, setting up, of course, the country-like production we're going to get throughout, using Southern vernacular and a very country-esque singing tone. Lastly, beyond all that, it's a very good hook. It is so different from anything else Beyoncé had ever done before this, and so I think it really went to show we're getting a new Beyoncé, one who's ready to take her place in the country scene, whether people wanted her to or not. The song also plays into the third trope I had labeled by tying into the final track, Amen, which explicitly calls back to the closing verse of American Requiem, but this time on a more finalized note. The final ding at the end of Amen is the first note to open American Requiem, meaning the album is intentionally designed to loop. Once again, not something you realize until you actually get to the end and loop back, but similar to Emails I Can't Send, it just creates this very full circle vibe to everything.
'Cause you're just a man, it's just what you do.
Norman fucking Rockwell, another classic example of the album opener being the title track, and another example where that title is never actually said in the song itself. It once again just stands as a metaphor for what's being sung about and everything about to come. Norman Rockwell was an American painter, known for making paintings of everyday life and American culture that were often satirical. And in this song specifically, I interpret this metaphor as a way to show how this man she's singing about colors her blue, a color for sadness and desperation, an image we see depicted on the album cover, and then later in Venice Bitch, which is track 3 of the album, where she actually does explicitly mention Norman Rockwell. And there are definitely deeper roots in American culture and the image of Americana, which has kind of defined Lana's entire career, and we get more of on this album as well, as she reflects a lot on that career. And so I do think the opener really summarizes and gets at a lot of the things that are going to make this album so powerful. When it comes to themes, again, we get stories of sadness and desperation. The song specifically is about a man-child, right, who is bad for Lana, who doesn't treat her well, but who she keeps coming back to anyways. He paints her blue, but she concedes, saying, "It's just what you do." And that theme is a feeling we see throughout the whole album, until the very end, where she once again admits that she feels like nothing will ever go right for her, but she holds out hope anyways. Sonically, the production is very dreamy, very stripped back. We have these really ambient violins really far in the background, almost kind of like we're driving somewhere. This production almost feels like she's painting a landscape. The vocals are very raw. Lana employs a lot of falsetto, again, adding to this dreamy artistic feel, and that is also going to carry out throughout the whole album. And again, easily one of her best songs, just done to perfection in every way. There's a reason this album is largely considered Lana Del Rey's magnum opus, even after having, like 9 albums. I think this still stands as like her best work. And a lot of it has to do with this opener. It's powerful, it represents everything we're about to get, and it's just what Lana does best.
No one knows what it's like to be high.
I feel like as we go through this list, the songs are just getting sadder and sadder.
Divorce, babe, divorce.
Strangers by Nature is the opener to 30, which is Adele's 2021 album diving into her divorce and the toll that took on both her relationship with her son and with herself mentally. Strangers by Nature is not a standard pop song. It contains 2 verses followed by a chorus and an outro. And so while the length is still a typical pop song length, it doesn't really feel like the opening song. It feels more like an interlude designed to transition us into the story we're about to hear, with Easy on Me being the first real song on the album. And I think that makes sense because Easy on Me not only was the lead single, but it really does kick off the story of the divorce. So why does Strangers by Nature work so well as this grandiose opener before we get into the real story? First, on the themes, Strangers by Nature sets up a lot of lyrical motifs we're about to get throughout the whole album. We have the Cemetery of Her Heart, which is symbolic of lost lovers and relationships. We have images of the dust settling, which is another motif we come back to quite often. Ultimately, we have the titular lyric, Strangers by Nature, which I think can be interpreted in so many ways, but I see it as a metaphor for all her past relationships. She's not really getting specifically into the divorce. She's not talking about any one particular relationship. She kind of views all her relationships as really, you're just strangers by nature. It takes a really long time to build trust between those strangers, and so when it doesn't work, how do you move forward? How do you push past that? And how do you, as she says, learn to nurture what you've done? That's such a beautiful, beautiful phrase that really sums up what she's going to talk about with this relationship in particular, that she then goes on to in the whole album. And I think the biggest clue that this is more of a transitional opening is that she ends saying, all right, then I'm ready. So she literally said, hey, all this was just rumination. I was just thinking out loud. I was just trying to get some feelings out. We're really starting the story now on track 2, which is Easy on Me. This also, of course, ties into the tone that is set up here. It's kind of dark and mysterious, but it's also hopeful. And most of all, it's introspective, which is important that Adele sets that up from the start. She's telling us, this is about me. This album is my journey and my self-discovery as I try to grapple with these feelings. And again, what I'm trying to do is show you why I think the specific techniques used in the song and the lyrics and the sounds work so well to not just be a good song, but hook us in. It spends just the right amount of time, I think, in this kind of fantasy world where Adele is sorting out her feelings before we get into the story and before really diving into that grief. Okay, we've done a lot of sad songs. I think we should up the tempo a little bit, shall we?
It's brutal out here.
Well, this song is still pretty sad, but it's also really grungy and upbeat and fun, thus making it the perfect opener to Sour by Olivia Rodrigo. Last but not least on the list, we're talking about Brutal, which while I do like All American Bitch more as a song, I do think Brutal is a better opener to its respective album. All American Bitch is still great, don't get me wrong, I could talk about it as well. But I think Brutal is just so perfect at setting up everything that we're going to get into with Sour. When it comes to themes, Brutal is all about teenage insecurity, which is the exact theme of this whole album. A lot of people view Sour as just like any other breakup album, but what's unique about Sour is that it's laced with motifs of jealousy, insecurity, self-comparison, and self-worth. Growing up surrounded by people who always seem happier than you, who seem better than you, who seem prettier than you. And that's why Brutal is a great opener, because the album largely talks about a certain relationship she had to overcome, but Brutal has nothing to do with relationships. She's not talking at all about anyone except herself. She just lists off every single thing that makes her insecure. And it's really sad, but I think it's also really brilliant because it creates this framework before we talk about the relationship, which is, track 2, Traitor, of just like, damn, I really hate myself and I'm not confident and I don't know what I'm doing. It's brutal. And I think that context is important because it kind of already gives us a sense of why this relationship failed, why she's in so much emotional turmoil. Tone-wise and sonically, aside from that general tone of yearning and longing, we also hear this really grungy sound. And so it really grabs your attention, it hooks you in, and it also foreshadows more grungy sounds that we do get later on Good For You and Jealousy Jealousy and other songs. But what's great about Brutal is that we still get that really sad, soft, emotional side very briefly at the end with these final two lyrics that arguably sum up the entire album and that beautifully transitions us into Traitor, which again, as you're seeing with a lot of these openers, Traitor is really the start of the story, whereas Brutal, track 1, is just giving us this like background exposition. And for those of you who saw my other video about Olivia Rodrigo, you'll know a lot of this is repeat from that, so if you want, you should definitely check that out, because I talk more about Sour and Guts and everything. Now you're probably wondering, wow, you've got an entire video talking about good album openers and you didn't talk about Taylor Swift? And yeah, I'm a little surprised too. But to be honest, I could probably do an entire video just about Taylor Swift's album openers and album construction. Oh wait, I have. I do have videos dedicated to her albums and analyzing their construction and the stories she tells, so you should definitely check those out if you want. Yes, I am shamelessly plugging myself right now. That sounded weird. And am I going to put Taylor Swift in the thumbnail despite not really doing a section on her? Maybe. But if you guys like this video, I would be more than happy to do a part 2. I have so many other album openers I could talk about, but I didn't want to go on for too long in this one. You already know the drill. If you enjoyed this video, definitely leave a like. And if you like hearing me talk about music, please subscribe. Sorry it's been a while since my last post. I was really going through it with finals, but summer is officially underway and I'm going to try to post more often now while I can. But that's going to be all for this one. Bye!